Welcome to the Where Do Gays Retire podcast, where we help you in the LGBTQ plus community find a safe and affordable retirement place. Join Mark Goldstein as he interviews others who live in gay-friendly places around the globe. Learn about the climate, cost of living, healthcare, crime and safety, and more. Now, here's your host, Mark Goldstein.
And welcome again to another episode of Where Do Gays Retire podcast. And today we have a special guest, Graham Tyner. He's from a company called Settle Easy, and I'll tell you a little bit about Graham. Graham was born in North Carolina, attended university in Virginia, headed to the big city of Boston to have a career in higher education, burned out on the pace of life and moved 8 years to Valencia, Spain. 8.5 years in Valencia, 5 of them currently in his business, Settle Easy, where he does a full range visa, residency, and relocation services. He loves dogs, water sports, and travel, dislikes water chestnuts. I don't really think there's a taste in water chestnuts. Do you?
It's the texture, man. It's all the texture.
Yeah, I don't really understand the whole thing, the concept. But anyway, he doesn't like mean people. Neither do I. And socks that are too short. And yeah, we were just talking about socks that are too short. It kind of hurts the feet. But anyway, let's get into the podcast. Welcome, Graham. I appreciate you being here. And we're going to find out and hopefully discover everything that there is to discover about Valencia, Spain. I'm really curious, and because I also am curious about Valencia, because we are looking to move to Spain, and we have a few cities in mind, my husband and I, and Valencia is definitely one of them. So first question really is, why did you choose Valencia? And tell us the story. Like, you were in the U.S., you felt kind of burnt out, and you just came to Valencia. I'm sorry. How did you do that?
Sure. So I had been in Boston at the time I left for about 8 years, and I was working at MIT. And that was sort of the career path. That was the dream job. That was everything that I thought I was supposed to do with my life, only to find that doing it every single day was sort of taking my life passion. And I wasn't being the person I wanted to be. I wasn't seeing the things I wanted to see. I was able to leave the Boston area for maybe 2 weeks a year, and the cost of living there didn't make international travel possible. So I was missing out on all the things I wanted in my life while I was young and healthy and able to do them. And so picking Valencia was important for me because their non-lucrative visa program was accessible to me. And so that's how I picked Spain. And then Valencia was chosen just because for the size of the city, the cost of living is way better than that of, say, Barcelona or Madrid. So Valencia for me is just the perfect size, the perfect amount of things, and the right sort of cost ratio for being able to move and have the money I had saved sustain me for a while.
And that's exactly what we're looking at too. We're looking at, of course, cost of living. And when we're ready to retire, I do have like a little bit over a year to go, but time flies pretty quickly. It takes time to get paperwork done and stuff like that. So right now I'm not in a rush, but of course I'm looking at all of these things too, the visa process and the bureaucracy that goes with it. And that's where you come in to the picture too. So did you have any other cities in mind, like when you thought about Spain? And did you just think about Spain? How did you pick Spain?
So I think that Spain, it was always Europe. And then Spain is just sort of one of the options in Europe in which the cost of living and the sunshine and all the things that I really wanted to focus on and value worked. There were a few places in Italy that I did consider. In Spain, Valencia was the only location that I considered simply because I knew I couldn't move to somewhere too small. So for me, there was never an option of moving to some picturesque, quaint Italian village on top of a hill or any of those things. I always needed sort of a bit of a city life, some culture options, food choices outside of the standard Spanish cuisine. And so I knew I needed to live somewhere relatively large. So Valencia just sold itself in terms of sort of the size and ease of life.
You sound like mini me, because it's me too. Like you're Boston, I was New York. I need urban. Right now I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. It's the fifth largest city in the US. Although it's sprawled out, I can get anything. I live in central Phoenix. I can get anything within 10 minutes. And that's something that I kind of like and need. So again, that's why I have my eyes on Valencia. So tell us, geographically speaking, where is Valencia located within Spain, for those that don't know? And tell us about where the beaches are and Center City, and sort of give us a picture of that.
Okay. So Valencia is essentially on the eastern Mediterranean coastline of Spain. It's located 4 hours, more or less, south of Barcelona. And it is 4 hours, these are car distances, 4 hours from Madrid, which is sort of in the center of the country. And so in terms of its positioning to the other large cities, it's relatively easy to get to. Madrid, for example, is a 90-minute train ride. The beaches of Valencia are sort of obviously to the far east of the city. They're about 7 kilometers from the city center to the beachfront. Most people, I would say, do live in the city center for sort of the connectedness, the amenities, just the general living. And then they'll hop a bus for 15 or 20 minutes to go to the beach. So there are sort of housing options on the beach, apartments and things. But I would say that the majority of people live in the city center and commute to go out to the beach. Many people do that. I go out 5 days a week. So it's close, it's easy, it's accessible. You can walk, you can bike, you can bus. But yeah, the beach is quite close. Valencia City is part of a larger Valencian community, which also encompasses places like Alicante, Castellón. So the Valencian community is much larger and does take up a good chunk of that sort of eastern coastline of Spain.
Gotcha. So, okay, so you travel, I'm trying to picture it in my mind. You travel to the beach by tram or train, a couple of stops maybe?
I mean, generally I would take the bus, and the
The
bus
bus?
stops every few blocks, which is great about the bus because it means no matter where you live, you're not hoofing it to a bus stop. You're walking 2 to 3 minutes outside your front door and getting on the bus. And so while it does stop frequently, it certainly is quick. But yeah, from the city center, most people can get to the beach in 20, 25 minutes, even on the bus stopping frequently. And yeah, biking, it takes more 30, 35 minutes, but that's a popular option for people, especially in the shoulder seasons. No one's biking in August.
Yeah.
That's a death wish behavior in Valencia. But yeah, it's really really accessible here.
Okay, that's great. Is the beach anywhere near the Science Center, which is the more modern area of Valencia?
Yeah, so the City of Arts and Sciences is actually probably, I think it's essentially in between the city center and the beach. So if you were
Okay,
to go on foot or bike, you would bike past that area, and it's about halfway. So if you were
gotcha,
living near, say, the City of Arts and Sciences, your beach commute would be closer to, say, 10 minutes on that same bus.
gotcha. Is living in an LGBTQ community important to you? And if so, did you choose to live in one? And is there one? Is there like a neighborhood?
So I think Valencia doesn't have a fixed gay. There are gay bars. There is queer culture. There are groups and people who meet up regularly, but there isn't a dedicated neighborhood the way that you would get in, say, San Francisco or New York, where you sort of know you've turned the corner and now everything is covered in a rainbow. There isn't that concentration of neighborhood here. Part of that is a difference that comes from sort of the mentality from being somewhere like the United States, where there is still sort of a segregation and these separations between people. Whereas in Spain, there doesn't need to be a neighborhood because they're not trying to keep the gays in or keep everyone else out for safety. So there's
That's a big
less
difference.
necessity for it. Moving from a place like, yeah, when I moved from Boston, Boston's a relatively liberal sort of place, but there was certainly a neighborhood. There was a place that you went for brunch with all your friends. There was a place that you lived if you could afford it. There was an area that was sort of like, this is where the gays go. And that's just less needed here because
And they
everyone
stuck
can feel
us,
comfortable everywhere.
and they stuck us like away, like the clubs were like away in Boston. Some of them.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay.
So
And
so there isn't here that real area because everything is just so much more friendly to everyone that you don't need it.
that's what I was thinking. Like here, you really want, in the US, and I'm not just speaking of Phoenix, but in the US, I want to have a gay bar where I can go to because here it matters. It's like people are not really integrated that much, and it's, I guess, a different culture than it is in Spain. So that's what I was kind of wondering, whether even gay bars are even needed.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly exist, I think, for a multitude of reasons. There are gay bars because sometimes people want to go out and actually meet someone. And a gay bar
Right.
is probably the easiest place to go and identify an individual who may be interested. Whereas if you're going out with a group of your friends and there are 10 of you and everyone is gay, it's likely that the organizer is going to pick their favorite cafe in their neighborhood and you're all going to go there. And so oftentimes, even when there are people in the LGBT community who are making events, they're just going to pick a place that they really like. And well, that's a gay bar now because there are 10 or 12 or 15 gay people outside. And so it's a gay bar now for today. And so you'd be much more likely to just see a group of gay people in any given place than having to say, well, we're going to go to this gay bar. There's just less of
Gotcha.
it.
Gotcha. So here's a good question. So wherever I live, I'm pretty outgoing and I like to make friends easily. How difficult is it now? I understand I'm in a different country and I don't speak the language yet. I am trying to learn the language before I get there. I know I'm not going to be proficient at all, but would you say it's difficult meeting friends? And I understand the culture of this of Spanish people are more family oriented. They stick to their family, but am I going to get there with my husband and not have any friends, or how? I mean, yeah, tell me.
Yeah. So what I would say is Valencia is the easiest place that I have lived city-wise to make friends. The caveat there is most people, especially when they're arriving, if they're not fluent in Spanish, are going to make friends with other expats, usually English-speaking expats, for example, if you're an English speaker. And so what you will have is a giant group of lovely friends who speak English, who you'll meet from the sort of multitude of meetings there are. There are meetings for people who like to play certain games like backgammon or chess. There are foodies meetings for people who like to eat. There is a knitting and cross stitching circle for people who like to make craft. There's a painting class and a photography class. And these are all things that are in English, usually hosted by other expats who have an interest and want to meet people with those interests. And so meeting expat friends here is quite easy because there is something going on so frequently that you'd be hard pressed to make it to everything without overbooking yourself. Making Spanish friends is a little harder because one, you have to have a grasp of the language usually. And then beyond that, they are really family oriented. And Valencia is the kind of town where even when young people are like, I'm getting out of this little town, which is not that little, they'll go to Madrid for a year and realize how much more expensive it is, how much harder it is, how much they miss their families. And they usually will return. And so I think Valencia is such a beautiful place to be that not as many people leave as you would think. And so what you have are these really insular communities of Valencianos who have their high school friends and their university friends and their entire family. And they have all their cousins who are similarly aged and a grandmother to go visit. And with all the infrastructure that they have, it is a little hard sometimes to chisel into that, to make a hole for yourself in this life that they created before you existed. So even if they really like you and you really like them and you figure out the language barrier, sometimes it's just hard to really, really become close friends with them because they have such an infrastructure already. So you won't be friendless, but the quest for the Spanish friend has been elusive sometimes. But those come with common interests. I know a guy who he was golfing with a guy because they both loved golf and they didn't have a common language, but they would just go out and use the little words that they had, and they loved playing golf together. So I think sometimes once you find a common interest with a Valenciano, you'll have a friend, somebody to play paddle with. These types of things, I think, is where you really build those relationships.
Gotcha. How about talking about the expat community? How large of an expat community is there? Let's say, let's compare it to, I know Alicante is smaller, but supposedly they have a large expat community.
I would say Valencia's expat community is more varied. So in Alicante, for example, most of the expats are from the UK, and that just historically comes from vacation homes and second homes and places like Benidorm, which are right outside of Alicante, that have a really specific sort of British historical sort of tourist vibe. Whereas I think Valencia, there is a more diverse expat community. So here, there are people from Germany, but they speak flawless English because many of them do. One of my good friends here is Swedish. So a lot of times the expats you'll meet here will just be from a more robust group of places, including the US. Whereas Alicante really does have this more UK Brit tourist vibe, and a lot of people who have moved for retirement because they were visiting there for so many years have then moved there either permanently into a home or purchased a home. And so the expat community, I'm not sure it's smaller in Valencia as much as it's just more diverse.
Gotcha. And that's exactly what I hear, that Valencia is a very diverse city. Is speaking Spanish like a must, or can you get by? I know if I'm going into, I'm considering myself going to be an immigrant, expat, immigrant.
Sure.
I'm in their country. I want to learn their language. I want to be able to learn their culture too, somewhat. I'm there. I feel like I'm a guest of theirs. How difficult does somebody coming from the United States that knows no Spanish or very little Spanish, how difficult is it to adapt to life in Valencia?
So in the Valencia city center, there's enough culture of tourism that many of the places that you'll go will be able to sort of have someone who can help you out in English. When you're going to your local cafe or smaller places like that, you will need to know the few functional words to get but they're really helpful in that if they understand that you have a limited sort of grasp on Spanish, they will help you through. So it might be hand gestures. They might use Google Translate. They might just not ask you the 3,000 questions they have. They'll just make a choice for you. So instead of being like, and do you want mayonnaise on that? Well, what about lettuce? They'll just put it on there. They'll just hope that you want it, and they'll put it on there for you because they know that bombarding you with a million questions about your sandwich isn't going to be helpful. And so they will be kind to you here, and more so than even other places in Spain that I've visited. Like my Spanish now is good enough to sort of do anything I need to do. But in the beginning, there were some rude awakenings. I went to Barcelona, and not only was I sort of scoffed at for my attempts at Spanish, which I always make because I think it's the respectful thing to do, I was responded to in basically like Catalan, like their local dialect that I really know nothing about. And so I found Valencia to be really kind about that sort of thing. And I always do encourage people to learn a little before you come, even if it's just, say, Duolingo or some app-based things that are really helpful. And then once you get here, there's tons of resources for one-on-one classes, for language schools. And that's a great way just to jump in and say, I've put in the effort. And even if it's not easy for me, I've gotten these words that I can use to get myself around. So I think if you can sort of speak in like words and some sort of really easy declarative sentences, you'll be all right.
And we'll get into healthcare in a little bit, but am I going to be turned away at a hospital if I have an emergency and they don't have anybody that speaks English?
Absolutely not. So the way that the hospitals work is if they have no one on staff who can speak English, which is rare for English. If you spoke another language that was less sort of global, you may run into an issue where they do have a translation line that they can call to basically interface between the patient and the doctor. That's a 24-hour line that they can call, and that's common in most European countries. With English, there's generally someone, even if it's the random desk clerk has English, they will bring them in to translate between you and the doctor. So you might not have an English speaking doctor, but there may be a person who can help you understand and them understand. In emergency situations, they will just grab you and treat you. If there's something wrong with you, they are not going to wait to explain it to you. They're going to fix you. And so
Yeah, they're
the
not going to
healthcare
let
here
you,
is
like,
incredible. Yeah, no, they're not going to let you just because you don't know the words. They're not going to not help you. And so there is that translation line which helps. There's often someone around who will help you. And so yeah, I would say that there's enough English speaking people that you almost never get in a situation where somebody doesn't know some words, and enough between your Spanish and their English to get you what you need.
what was your most frustrating or embarrassing point when you first got here? Do you remember, as far as language is concerned?
The thing that I struggled with the most in the very beginning that I thought would not be so hard is it took me the better part of 3 months to get. So the drinking water in Valencia and in all of Spain is drinkable, but it's not particularly delicious. It has a high calcium content and it's almost a bit salty if you're used to sort of drinking other water. So while it's fully drinkable, a lot of people who come from other places don't like the taste of it. And so we get these, it's called aqua service, which is those big office water bottles that you have
Hmm.
that have the little cups and stuff that you would
Oh,
drink
yeah.
in sort of any given office. Most, a lot of people have those in their homes to have sort of large quantities of drinking water available when they don't want the tap. And it took me 3 months talking to the same woman on the phone just to convey to her that I would like them to bring those to my house, just like they bring them to everyone else's house. And I would wait. I would talk to her from what I was understanding through however we were communicating. Okay, next month it's set up, it's going to come. And then I would wait an entire month just waiting on water. And then I would be like, well, it didn't come this month. I'll have to call again. And so for 3 months, I called once a month, being like, did you forget me? Where's my water? And that was probably the most frustrating thing that happened to me in the beginning because it took me months. So I was hauling these 8-liter bottles of water from the grocery store every couple of days for
Gotcha.
the house. And it just took me forever for something that seemed so simple.
Simple. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure I'll run into situations comparable to that. What's the local economy like? Like, tell us about housing costs, renting versus owning, brick bill, gas bills, taxes, all that good stuff.
So I haven't lived a ton of places, but Valencia has the largest range of sort of rental and purchase costs that I have seen anywhere I've lived. So when I was in Boston, there wasn't a ton of wiggle room. It's like everyone was paying rent sort of within a range of what was normal. And you might be a little cheaper if you lived in a certain neighborhood, and it might be more expensive if you lived in Beacon Hill. But all in all, there was just sort of this minimum and a maximum sort of
Hmm.
standard of rent. And what I would say here for both renting and purchasing is like you could rent for as little as 600. Some people pay 2,000, even 2,500 a month. And that's a large range. And that comes from the
Sure
fact that
is.
there are sort of local apartments. There are the way that the locals live just because their income is less than what we're usually used to. And so places that locals can live are on the market. And if you want to live in one of those types of apartments, you can have a relatively low rent. Whereas sometimes people are like, but I need an American sized kitchen and a refrigerator that opens with two doors and air conditioning in every single room. And for those things, you will pay a premium. For things like terraces, you will pay a premium. And so I would say that rent could vary anywhere from 600 euro a month to around 2,000 a month would be a standard range. Anything above that, you'd be getting into something super luxury or a villa. For example, if you go 6 bedroom, 3 bath with a pool and a yard, you could definitely blow that out of the water if you'd like. In terms of buying, there's things under 100K that are fixed. We're going to buy this structure, gut it, and make it beautiful. But I would say if you are looking to move into something livable, that can start as low as about 130,000. For I'm going to move into this little 2-bedroom, 1 bath, and it's livable now, but I'll put up some art and make it beautiful.
Pretty
But I know
inexpensive.
people, it is, but I know people who have paid a couple million for a house or a villa out in one of the sort of pueblos. But living in the city center, generally when people purchase, they're purchasing anywhere between 130 and about 400 or 450.
Gotcha.
So that is still quite a wide range.
It,
But like with things like the Golden Visa, for example, where you have to spend 500,000 to qualify, for example, sometimes people struggle to find a $500,000 apartment for in the city center, because for that much money you're really buying something pretty nice or pretty large.
Now, I had a question. In fact, I was talking about during dinner last night. On the Golden Visa, it's 500,000, and I know in a real estate transaction in Spain, there's a lot of extra fees and taxes and stuff like that. So my question was, let's say you buy a place for 450 and all of the other fees that are included, I don't know, taxes and real estate fees, everything in the whole deal cost 500. Is that, will that be accepted as a golden visa, or the purchase price of has to be 500 and then you're paying 525?
Correct. So the purchase price would need to be 500 or more, and you will pay that extra 25 to 30% that it sometimes costs to actually clear and get taxed on a place on top of that. So your mortgage-free investment on the property has to be 500.
Mortgage free. That's another
Correct.
thing. They don't allow mortgages?
Nope, not on a golden visa.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. So you have to bring $500,000 of cash and to close the deal to get a golden visa. And a golden visa will allow you instant residency?
I mean, there's a registration, there's a process of applying. It is a slightly faster process than the non lucrative visa most of the time. The biggest difference between those and the reason that people would choose them are twofold. One of them is that if you wanted permission to work from day one, having that golden visa would give you work permission, whereas something like the non lucrative visa, as it implies, doesn't allow you to work in Spain. The other one is for a non lucrative visa, you have to be in Spain for more than 182 days in your visa year. Whereas on the golden visa, you are only required to come to Spain once a year to keep your visa valid. So
Wow.
long as you were to come to Spain, you could come for a long weekend and not come again for the rest of the year and keep your visa. So those are the two main differences. And when people choose a golden visa, it tends to be because they want to be able to work in Spain and they have the money to get the house to basically buy themselves work permission, or they're traveling in such a way that they really do want to be in Spain for a limited amount of time, say less than 6 months a year. And when that's the case, you would have to have a golden visa or just come as a tourist.
So I know that they're speaking about visas. We're talking about it anyway. I know that they're coming out with the digital nomad visa that's being worked on. Let's say I do this for more or less like a hobby. Some people, I ask for them for donations, and they donate, and that's part of I have set up an LLC for Where Do Gays Retire. So if I was to move and I'm retired from my full-time job and I just have this little side thing going on, but I can make a couple $100 or up to maybe $1,000 during a year, would I be required to have a digital nomad or a type of working visa as opposed to a non-lucrative?
For things like that, some people do have sort of these side things or hobbies, or they finally retired and now they can paint and they do want to sell a few paintings, for example. So for these type of things, we generally recommend that people do what you're suggesting, where is it's a recommended donation. And so you can say that the recommended donation for this piece of art is €500. And when someone pays that recommended donation, you can take their money and happily ride away into the sunset with them. And so it's really just about not actively working in Spain. Their reason for not giving work permission is to protect them. the unemployment rate here is relatively high. Sort of across the board, it's close to 15%, and it's way higher for the younger sector. And so they're really, really, really just trying to protect Spanish jobs and protect sort of certain fields from getting saturated with people who aren't work eligible. So as long as you're not trying to take a Spanish job or create infrastructure in Spain where you're hiring people and making money and have a real business, the little types of things, the side things, are easy enough to do, especially if you're being paid into an external bank account.
Okay.
And plenty of people
And,
do those things because, hobbies.
right. You got it. So going back to, we were talking about purchasing and buying and utilities and cost of living. What do you think, like electric bills? I know it depends upon the person. Electric is probably a little bit more expensive, like gas.
So, what I would say is that electric here is more expensive. It feels very expensive, especially to the Spanish, because the percentage of their income that they are using to pay their electricity is particularly high. And so your electric bill would probably not go up drastically from what you're paying now to if you move to Valencia, because it's all about perception and what you're used to. So, but the other thing about electricity here is you will use a lot less of it, and that's how it also balances out. So if you kept the same practices and habits, say you had central air that you left blaring at 68 degrees Fahrenheit for 24 hours a day for the entirety of the summer, if that's the life that you're used to, if you did that here, sure, you could easily have a €500 electricity bill. But things here are not built to be that way. So, for example, you wouldn't turn the lights on in your house until the sun starts to go down because you don't need them because there's so much sunshine that there's just no need for the lights until the sun goes out. As for things like air conditioning, which people always want to know about because it's pretty warm here, you would have an air conditioning sort of, it's built into the wall, but you would have a unit and it's in any given room. So you would be running the air conditioning in your living room if you're sitting and watching television or on your computer or on your tablet reading. And then before you go to bed, you would turn that one off and turn on the one in your bedroom and sleep in that space. And so the culture here is not to just have air conditioning blasting in every room of your house, even the empty ones. And so all in all, the electricity cost, while it is more here, tends to be what people who come from the US are used to paying, simply because the way that electricity is used there is so different.
Gotcha.
So I
That's interesting.
personally, in my apartment, 2 bedroom, 1 bath, the most expensive my electricity has ever been was 130 a month, and that was in the heat of the summer.
Okay. Because here in Phoenix, in the heat of the summer, electric going, air conditioning going. Some rooms of the condo are hotter than others. I've had over $300 electric bills in the summer, and then of course during the winter months we shut it off, so it kind of evens out a little bit. But still, and I like that. I like you're in one room, and if it's hot in there, put it on the air in there, and then if you go into another room, you go to sleep, you put it on in there. So I'm definitely, I agree. How about taxes?
So taxes are really individual. It varies kind of person to person, what they have going on, if there's actually income versus just savings. That's the biggest thing when people retire is like, do you just have a chunk of money? If you just have a chunk of money, that tends to not be a big deal for taxes because they're not going to tax you on just having savings out there in the world. But when people are making income, or if for some reason they have invested money that is just making tons and tons and tons every year, then there becomes a point where you may become tax liable. And that really just comes down to the individual. Spain, in terms of Europe, is really middle of the road when it comes to tax liability for foreigners. So somewhere like Portugal has way more tax loopholes, lower tax liability in general. Other places are more expensive. Italy, Germany, all of the sort of Scandinavian bits have way higher tax liability because their individual cost to be sort of in their public system is just more. And so, yeah, Spain's pretty middle of the road in terms of what you're going to end up with tax liability. But there's a chance that with retired people, many of them do not need to pay Spanish taxes so long as they stay on top of their US tax liability. They won't have
Right.
any additional liability here.
unless they qualify for a wealth tax, which I think in Spain is you get $700,000. That's if you make more than 700,000, then you're considered wealthy, I guess, and you're going to get taxed on that. And also, I think if you buy a property, they give you a $300,000. If I'm correct.
Yep. So you get 700,000 per person. So if you were a married couple,
Per
you could
person.
double the amount of sort of coverage and clearance that you have. So for married couples, that doubles to about 1.5 million. But yes, if you
Wow.
have more than 1.5 million, they will give you an exemption for a home up to it's either 300 or 350. And if you have money beyond that, then you would technically have to at least speak with someone about what to do about wealth tax. And of course, it's Spain. So you'll get a lot of different answers depending on who you speak to about what should be declared and what shouldn't in terms of what is wealth and what isn't. Because what they're really, really looking to tax there is actually income, not holdings. And so if you find the right tax professional, they'll give you the answers that sort of make that a little less pressing for you. And they can also let you know where in the US to keep your money because there's certain types of accounts that need not be declared. And so if you're willing to shuffle your money around a bit, you can put it in places that aren't tax liable based on wealth tax. And that's what some people choose to do if they've amassed a good amount of money or they're still making money and they just don't want to have to basically pay on it twice. Because for all this money that you are potentially generating, you are already paying U.S. taxes if you're a U.S. citizen.
Gotcha. So that's interesting. I didn't realize it was 700,000 per person.
Correct.
Yeah,
That's really helpful for married
that's reasonable.
couples because as an individual, if there's two of you, that threshold may not be huge for if you've set
Right.
yourself up for full retirement. Whereas, yeah, doubling it kind of helps most people stay under the threshold.
Now, we were touching a little bit about marriage, like if you're married. So here's my question too. This is kind of interesting because of the recent current events in the U.S. So we're married, but if that married right is taken away from the states and I'm from the federal government and it goes back to the states and it's up to each individual state to decide whether you're going to be married or not. What happens there? I mean, if I move to Spain and I'm married in the U.S., and I know you're not a lawyer, but I'm kind of like I'm worried. Number one, because one of the justices flat out said that,
Sure.
like it could happen. I don't know if it will. I don't know if I'll be grandfathered, but who the hell wants to take a chance?
Sure.
So I'm sure so many people are thinking about that too.
Yeah.
So if I'm married in the States and I come to live in the US and in Spain and I'm not a citizen, could I still get married again in Spain and be married?
So, first of all, that would be a full out atrocity. And it's horrible that we're even having to have this conversation because
Right.
that is horrible. If that were to happen, if for some reason somebody who were married were to be stripped of their marital rights from the greatest country in the world and all, if that were to happen, then our recommendation generally for people who are not married or for some reason need to be married is actually to go to Denmark. Denmark is the Vegas of Europe when it comes to getting married and the ability to sort of get married there quickly and with the least amount of paperwork exists there. And so we would probably send people to Denmark, have them get married in Denmark, and then they would have a European marriage that could be used for all purposes while in Spain. Getting married in Spain is a little tricky when you aren't a citizen here just because there's a lot of red tape and paperwork. But the biggest part of getting married abroad in general is getting something called a single certificate, which is basically comes from your local, in your case, the US government. It would come from the state that you are domiciled in. And it basically says that this person's marital status based on the legalities of the state is single, married, widowed, divorced, whatever the case is. You have to have a certificate that says that you're basically not married to get married elsewhere in Europe. So if they were to strip your marital rights, you would be eligible to get a single certificate, which would allow you to get married in Europe. So it is not a great scenario, and I certainly hope that doesn't happen. But yes, I would tell everyone to go get married by an Elvis impersonator in Denmark.
It's so sad. It really is that sad that we're even talking about this. And I've gone through those decades where I started as a domestic partner. I went to a civil union in the state of Connecticut. Civil union turned into marriage, but before it turned civil union in Connecticut turned into marriage in Connecticut before the federal same-sex marriage was enacted for everyone. And then I moved to Florida, and I wasn't married anymore because marriage rights weren't legal yet. So I went from married in Connecticut to unmarried in Florida, with kind of in the back of my head knowing that it was going to happen within the next year. So, and it did. So I went from married to unmarried back to married. Now I have to think about it's quite unnerving.
Sure.
So
And on that note, the other thing for people is oftentimes we get people who have been in long-term partnerships in the United States. And so they're basically having either common law or just general civil rights between their relationship because they've been together for so long. For those people, if they don't feel like or want to or can't get married before they were to make the move, you can apply for visas as sort of separate individuals, even if things like, say, you have the same health insurance policy, you provide the same address, you can apply separately, and that's better for some people. But then in terms of the protections and things, we generally do recommend that people sort of solidify either a marriage with a certificate in the US that can be transferred to here, or that they get married somewhere like Denmark that basically just allows them to have a piece of paper for all the legal protections that they need. So it is not impossible to move if you're partnered with someone rather than legally married, but you do just have to think more about making sure that all the protections you want are in place, either through legal documentation or a single marriage document.
yeah, and that's something that we're now thinking about too. It's like, okay, now we should speak to an attorney here in the U.S. and see what we can do just in case something like this happens. How do we protect our assets and our condo and real estate holding? It's ridiculous. I don't even want to talk about it anymore. So tell us about good things like the climate. What's the summers like? Is it unbearable? Hot?
Hot.
Hot as Malaga, Florida, or
So, I'm from North Carolina where it gets hot. And I think that Valencia is nice because it's on the sea. And so when you start moving inland, if you ever go to Madrid in August, it looks like a ghost town from the sort of perspective of locals. There are nothing but tourists there because the locals all leave. They know better. It's hot. And so the place is relatively empty, and then you'll sort of see tourists, groups, somebody walking down the street, 50 people, somebody holding up an umbrella up front to keep them in line. So you see all the tourists and none of the locals. It is a ghost town. Valencia is not quite that bad, but I would say in the summer, from June all the way through September, it's between 80 and 90 degrees every day. And so I think it's the longevity of the heat that sometimes gets people. So it's the end of June now, and I know it's only going to get progressively warmer until the end of September.
is it humid?
And
Hot?
the humidity level is actually not particularly bad here. I think from the sea, there's a bit of just sort of breeze, and it keeps the humidity down by compared to other places. So it's not a particular humidity, but it's not dry either. It's just this middle of the road kind of heat. And yeah, it's between 80 and 90 kind of all summer long. The winters, though, for me, coming from Boston, are the standout where every day high is usually between 55 and 60, and it rarely gets below 40 degrees. So if it gets below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when the Spaniards really start losing it. They are like, what is happening here? Well, the Valencians, I suppose, because they're pretty weather spoiled. What is happening? Why is it so cold? There was one day where it was -1 Celsius. So I suspect that's around, I don't know,
Less than
38.
32 to
Yeah, or 30, probably 30 degrees, maybe 28 degrees. So, cold, but certainly not the coldest it's ever been anywhere.
Right.
And it was in the newspaper on the front page of the paper that day said that you should cover your mouth when you went outside, and that you shouldn't run or do any sort of exercises because the cold air would basically make your lungs freeze. And I got such a kick out of this coming from Boston because I'm thinking everyone there would have frozen lungs for 2 months out of the year. Oh,
Right.
I mean, the first day it gets above freezing, you sort of have a little melt party because something might become water again. And I just thought it was so funny that as soon as it hit freezing, this was a particularly cold patch several years ago, that nobody knew what to do. And they all were wearing like scarves and things covering their nose and mouth to not breathe in the cold air. So yeah,
It's like
it's
it's like where you come from too. So right now I live in Phoenix, and I came from Florida before Phoenix, and then New York before for the rest of my life. But Phoenix goes up to 115, 120. So for me, 80, 90 is, ooh, it's a little chilly. It's a little chill in the air. So, yeah, and that's another reason my husband was saying, you know what? Everybody's saying, oh, they like Portugal and stuff like that, but Portugal's a little chillier.
it is.
And for us, coming from Phoenix, we're kind of used to it. I mean, we don't hang out in the hot weather. We go in air conditioning. So, but the fact is, it gets that high and we
Sure.
get it. And when we lived in New York, it's freezing. So we come here and people are wearing winter coats when it gets down to like the 60s, which is
Yeah.
kind of funny. So it's all relative. So
Yeah, I think
I
the
hear you.
best example of something like that with Portugal to Spain is if you think about the sea, the Atlantic Ocean. So if you're in, say, Florida or the Outer Banks of North Carolina, that sort of really warm, lovely, sandy seaside is what you get in the Mediterranean coast in Spain. If you cross over to Portugal, that's Atlantic. And
Right.
so that West Coast thing that you're used to, that sort of rockier, colder, wilder beast that you would get on, say, the West Coast of the United States, is very much what you get in Portugal. So they both have their perks. If you're surfing, you want to be in Portugal. And they're both lovely. But that's kind of what the difference is for me when I go to, say, like Porto or Lisbon and I
Hmm.
visit their seaside versus the seaside here, is that's like the difference feels like to me. It's sort of being on the Florida coast versus being out near Santa Barbara, for example.
Yep. I'd rather be in the Santa Barbara sipping a glass of wine on the Mediterranean. That's
Exactly.
that's my. How about an arts and culture scene? Coming from New York City, of course, I'm not going to have anything like that. Love Broadway. Here in Phoenix, I walk to the Phoenix Theater. Is there any theater that you can go to that's in English?
So most of that sort of stuff is going to be in Spanish in terms of like like if it's got language, it will be in Spanish language. Although often for things like opera, for example, they'll be in Italian or something anyway.
Right.
So there is an opera house. It is the Palau Reina Sofia that's here in Valencia in the City of Arts and Sciences, and they do a full season opera program every year. So I guess that's probably 6, 7 months a year. They're running sort of operas and things. Then there's the Palau de la Musica, where like right now they're in the middle of a 14-day jazz festival, for example. And of those sort of like when the jazz festival comes, which comes yearly, some of those acts will be from Italy. Some of them will be Spanish. There's some Americans who come. Sometimes they're from the UK. And so a lot of that is kind of, you'll just get the language that you'll get, which is kind of fun and interesting because you'd be hard pressed to go to a jazz festival in the United States and hear 3 or 4 languages and interpretations on, say, jazz. And so, what you miss by not having everything be in English is this sort of cultural awareness of, like, huh, there is some jazz happening in Greece. Who knew? But of course there is. Why wouldn't there
Right.
be? And so, yeah, I would say for actual like theater, there's also in the same venue, they do all of the orchestral stuff. So there are full out orchestras where they will do what you would expect, and they're quite good, actually. I mean, coming from Boston, where I thought that the music was particularly good, the Boston Pops, and there's some nice music there. But yeah, Valencia has some pretty good stuff going on. I mean, that for me, I was saying earlier, the size of Valencia and the accessibility to these types of things are the reason that for me personally, I couldn't be somewhere like, say, Malaga or in any of the smaller kinds of places. They're lovely. The beaches are great. There's plenty of cocktails to sip, places to sit, friends to make.
Bored.
But I would get bored. I need there to be, oh, well, this is playing, like, I'll go to the opera. Or a friend will say, I have season tickets and I'm going to be out of town. Does anyone want my opera tickets? And so that sort of thing is something that I'm interested in having. And then the other cultural thing here, which is for some people and not, is football. So the Spanish soccer league is very good and very popular. And so that is very much a cultural institution for many people here. So if you're into the sports ball, having season tickets to that or going with your friends, sitting in the stands, taking in that atmosphere is a very, very popular thing to do. So it's a little different than the opera or the theater or some of the other things, but it's very much a Spanish institution. It is to have a team to root for, and you'll go to the bar and root for them if they're playing away. You might go near the stadium if they're playing at home, even if you don't have a ticket. And that's just this nice cultural thing. And that's a great way to also meet Valencia because they obviously have a hometown interest. They're vested in their team, but it's accessible and affordable enough for people. If you're somewhere where, like in Boston, if your grandpa didn't have tickets to the Red Sox, you're not going to see a game.
Right.
That this is generational heritage hand-me-down sort of thing to get in there even. Whereas here, you can buy a ticket and you might make friends with the person that sits next to you because they snuck in beer and you snuck in sandwiches. And you'll make friends and you'll make community. And so there's a lot of different things like that. There's museums, lots. There's a fine arts museum. There's a modern art museum. And Sorolla is from Valencia. So there are often like Sorolla exhibits and things, and also other types of exhibits that will rotate. So if the Sorolla rotates out from Valencia, some other things might rotate in.
Then you have that whole sciences area.
Like there was a lovely Degas exhibit that basically took over the entire Sorolla space for about 6 months. So yeah, there's nice culture, there's nice art, and if Valencia doesn't do it for you for $30, you can get on an airplane and go to Paris. So
that's very true. $30. That's unbelievable. That's unbelievable. Do they still have bullfights?
They do. So it has been outlawed
in Valencia.
Yep, in a few places in Spain they have outlawed bullfighting. Valencia still does have its bull ring up and functional. They run bullfights twice a year in Valencia, once for the Fallas Festival, which happens in March, and again during the July Fair, which is actually about to start. So the next set will be in the next few weeks. So their kind of middle ground was they only do it twice a year rather than having it sort of year-round. It is controversial. The Spanish equivalent, PETA, and the other Spanish equivalent of PETA does go and protest every single time it happens. So it's certainly a controversial thing. Not everyone is into it, but there are people who believe in it for the historical perspective. And so it does remain here, but certainly it's not this unscathed kind of thing. Like people have their opinions about it here too.
Right. Okay. All right. So let's talk about food, restaurants, international cuisine. Does Valencia have that?
Okay, so in terms of like good high quality food, there are 20 Michelin star restaurants in the Valencian community. 7 of them are in Valencia City, and 2 of them have 2 Michelin stars. So in terms of sort of highly refined good cuisine, there are options for sort of very good world-class Michelin star food. In terms of international cuisine, that's probably one of the things where Valencia in particular isn't my favorite. And I think that comes from the fact that there just aren't enough people from certain places for there to be good versions of things. And so in certain realms, say Indian food, there's enough people from India and Nepal that there's enough restaurants that some of them are good and some of them are bad. But when it comes to things like I love various cuisines from Africa, but when you're looking to get something like that, there just aren't enough people who've immigrated here to make any sort of competition. So there might be a single restaurant, but it's not the greatest. So for example, Mexican food is something that is here, but it's not the quality that I'm used to from where I'm from.
That's
Thai
what I hear.
food is another thing where the Chinese
Or
food is actually
Chinese.
great. The Chinese food is great. And the reason it's great is because there was a huge influx here after Franco. They needed to open the country up. And one of the places that they viewed at that time as just having a lot of people who were interested in sort of commerce and making money was China. So they opened Spain up to China in the 1980s, and the influx of Chinese people to Spain was huge. So the
Okay.
Chinese food is actually pretty good, but there's no Thai food to be had. So it really, really does depend. The sushi game has gotten better in the last 8 years. I would say when I came here from Boston, I was like, what is this? Like, why you can you even call this sushi? But now there are several really good restaurants where if they got plucked up and dropped down in New York or Boston or LA, you'd be like, yeah, that's pretty good.
That's great.
So it's
I
getting better.
understand. I understand you can't order paella for dinner. You have to have that for lunch.
Yeah.
That's what I
So
was told.
paella is a lunch food because it's too heavy for them. They're really into digestion here, and you can't be eating that much rice at dinner. The other thing you're only supposed to eat during the day is melon. So any form of melon, watermelon, those types of things, you'd think that you'd eat them all the time because it's hot. And what's better, watermelon summer, that's a lunch food as well. They think that it does poorly with the digestion and should be eaten during the day. So there are a few cultural things that they want you to eat at lunchtime, but there are plenty of places that serve paella to tourists at dinner while all the locals just scoff at them.
Gotcha. How about crime? Crime and safety. As a gay couple or as a gay man, do you have any thoughts about that as far as being gay, or is there's no crime at all because there's no guns except for
Um,
pickpocketing?
yeah. So Valencia is outrageously safe, and the gender presentation or sexual orientation of a person is not likely to impact them being a victim of any form of crime that does exist. The crimes that do exist here are always crimes of opportunity and rarely crimes of violence. So if you leave your bag sitting on the beach, someone might take it. If you leave
Hmm.
your bag sitting on your picnic blanket and you're having fun, and you turn around, a bag or two might be gone. There's this new thing that is happening sort of all over the place, but especially in the riverbed here in Valencia. People have their phones and they'll be holding them in their hand. Somebody will come by on one of those electric scooters
Swipe them.
and just swipe it right out of their hand and keep
Oh my
riding.
God.
So these are they're theft crimes. They have increased since COVID because economically Spain was one of the worst hit places through that because the closures were so severe here
Right.
that people lost money, people lost jobs, and when that happens, people get desperate. And so those things where your bike got stolen from outside your apartment, those types of things do happen here. But in terms of crime, either being violent or where they have to interface with you. So even muggings, where it's like, we're just going to take your stuff but scare you, happens way, way, way less frequently here than most other places.
That's
There's
good. That's good to know.
0% gun violence because no one has a gun. So really what you're looking at are basically
Okay.
petty
It's
theft.
like,
It's petty theft. Even home break-ins aren't common in the city center. They are more common out in the suburbs where people might have vacation homes. You leave your house for 6, 8, 10 weeks to go back to wherever. Somebody might
right.
break in if you don't have a security system. But
Do they have squatters too?
there are squatters and things. But in the city center, there's just less of all of that. My building, for example, there are 5 apartments in the whole building. There's 2 per floor, and then the people upstairs have a double. And so if we saw someone in the building who sort of didn't belong here, someone would say, hey, like, what you
Call
doing?
them out.
You call them out. And sometimes it's as easy as, oh, I'm a friend of. But if you say the name of the person you're a friend of, not a big deal. Or, oh, we're renting unit 3 through an Airbnb. Well, okay, people are checking in. But just
Right.
like, I'm shady, I came in the door and now a TV's going out the front door is unlikely to happen in the city center. And so I think that's why it's more popular out in the burbs. Because you can get in and out of one of those villas, but you're not getting out the front door of this building with my television without my neighbors being like, what you doing? What,
All right.
why are you taking
What's
that
going on here?
television? Yeah, like,
That's cool.
so that sort of thing doesn't really happen in the city center here. It's safe. It's the kind of place anyone can walk in the middle of the night. It's well lit. And yeah, I never
That's
feel
unbelievable
unsafe
to
here.
me too. That's unbelievable to me too. It's like people say family after dinner, and dinner 10, 11 o'clock at night. They're out for a walk after dinner until midnight, and that's common.
Yeah.
And here in the big cities in the U.S., it's like I'm looking over my shoulder. I come from New York. I come from Brooklyn, New York. So I'm like, all right, am I going to get killed going home? So yeah, that's something that we look for in a place, of course. Let's see. Healthcare. We talked about healthcare, and I know in Spain, at first you need to buy private healthcare. And tell us a little bit about that. And then I think after a year of residency, you can go and buy the public healthcare.
Yeah, so both the public and private healthcare systems here are really, really good. The preference for one over another generally comes from sort of pre-existing conditions and that sort of thing. So some people get the private, they're happy to stay on it and be in it. Some people really want the public system because, say, they came here with something that pre-existed and they had to not be fully truthful about it to get their private health coverage. They want to move on to a system that can't exclude them for the fact that 7 years ago they had cancer, but they're afraid that maybe in 2 or 3 years, if it came back, they would find out and they wouldn't have coverage. So sometimes people say, well, right now I don't have cancer, but as soon as they have that 1 year down, they will go and get the public system just to safeguard themselves against the pre-existing condition thing. And that's a smart thing to do. And that's something that we recommend that people do if that's their situation.
Yeah.
But the healthcare is great on both ends. The doctors are really, really good. Finding an English-speaking doctor, it's a little easier in the private system because you have a choice of doctors, whereas in the public system, you're assigned someone right in your neighborhood. So my local healthcare center is at the end of my street, and there's about 6 doctors in there, and I get assigned one of them, which is great because if it means I'm sick, I walk up my front door and I walk 3 minutes down the street, and I will walk in and they will take care of me. So there's something to be said about that. Whereas for other things where if you know that you like to see a podiatrist every 6 months and you're in the private system, you can find an English-speaking podiatrist and set that up and sort of have a more regimented healthcare routine. But the doctors are really good. The healthcare is really, really good. And because it's not monetized the way it is in the US, I have found the quality of care to be so much better. So all of the things that they consider day surgery in America, you get an overnight here just so they can keep an eye on you, and then they let you out the next morning. So they generally, if they take you in for one of those morning surgeries, you get about a 24-hour turn just because they want to monitor you overnight to make sure that you're good, to give you some IV antibiotics to make sure that there's no infection. But in America, they say, well, that's expensive. They don't want to pay for it. We don't want to pay for it. You're out. And so you get just sort of a more kind of comprehensive care because it's not so monetized.
Gotcha. Yeah, last year I had an angiogram where they had to go into the heart, look in there, and I'm like on the operating table and the guy goes, okay, we're done. And I was like, done prepping? And he was like, no, we're done. And it was out the door. So yeah, everything is quick in the US. There's rush. And I like the laid back life that Spain offers.
Yeah, I mean, your doctor is making the same amount per hour, regardless of what you have going on and what you need. So they can spend the extra few moments with you because it's not like, well, okay, if I get to the next patient, I get to tick another box and every patient's worth this many dollars. It's like I'm here for 6 hours. It's my shift. And I will just go room to room and spend the time it takes. And so that lack of monetization of the system gets such a different vibe when it comes to patient care. And it wasn't something I expected. I looked at the healthcare and expected it to be good because when you look at the international health ratings, Spain is usually in the top 20 of worldwide healthcare. I think they were ranked 6th last time, actually, in 2020. So the healthcare expected to be good, but I didn't know why it was so different until I came from the US to Spain and realized that when it's not all dollar signs, that everything just feels so much better.
Tell me they don't run TV commercials for pharmaceuticals. Here in the US, every 2 seconds, I mean, every commercial is some sort of drug that who cares?
Yeah,
I don't want to hear another drug commercial.
And it's all the things that it's going to do to you.
It's going to kill you.
Would you like your skin to be clear? But it could cause blood clots, heart attacks.
Exactly.
And you're
it's like what's up with that? Oh
Like,
my
I'll eat my
God,
eczema.
Lord.
They do not run those commercials here, and the reason for that is because you don't really get a choice of medications. So in the US, it's sort of like we need providers and people to go in and immediately say, I want this drug name. I saw it on television. They said the television said this would help my diabetes. And here they're like, we're going to assess your blood sugar and give you the medication or insulin or whatever it is you need to regulate it. So it's
Right.
not about you getting to choose some special drug. It's not about you getting to pick of the three heart medications. They're going to decide which one's best for you and they're going to give it to you. And so, yeah, there's so much less of that. Like prescriptions
Oh
here,
God.
you'd be hard pressed to pay. I mean, every prescription I've ever had has been less than 20 euro. Antibiotics are about €3 when you go and get like anything for pain. That's usually around a euro 20 to a euro 80 for a box of 24 to 30. So even the cost of things like Advil and Tylenol and those basic
Yeah.
over the counter things are way lower. But then anything that's prescription is lower as well because there's no coverage. So it's not like a copay situation, but when you're
Right.
going in and paying cash, 14 days of antibiotics will run you €3. So
Yeah.
it's not like, well, you have a 25 euro copay to cover $200 worth of antibiotics for your sore throat.
Right.
Just different.
And healthcare, in other words, is not gonna. You don't have to worry to go broke.
No,
Whereas here in the U.S., oh, you can. People definitely go
no.
broke because they get sick. And we were just thinking about long-term care here in the U.S. Think about long-term care.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous, but it's refreshing to hear that the healthcare
Yeah, I
in
mean, the
Europe and
great thing
Spain.
here is with the public system, no matter what happens to you, you can get into the public system and you could never go broke because you'll never have a bill. So the idea of bankruptcy or a second mortgage on a home because of healthcare or about younger people being like, how do we afford our childcare cost and for to somehow help our parents because they've had some medical catastrophe? Those things just don't happen here because the system takes care of its people.
You know what? And that blew me away. What blew me away was when I heard someone say, in Spain or Portugal for that matter too, if you, God forbid, get cancer, you've gone through enough just having cancer. And so the country doesn't want you to suffer anymore, so they pay for everything.
Yeah. I've not seen a medical bill in 8 years. I just haven't seen one. They don't come. They don't send them. There's nothing to pay for. If you're working, you pay sort of as part of your salary. If you're paying in, you pay in. But for example, for people over the age of 65, that is €157 a month in Spain. So you pay them 157 a month, and that is full coverage. You'll never see a bill. And that is a
Unbe-
steal.
It's unbelievable.
So
Unbelievable. So that's really reassuring that I wouldn't have to fly back to the States if I got sick in Spain.
no, you wouldn't. Not only would you not have to, you wouldn't want to because you know the care here would be better.
It's unbelievable. Something to look forward to, I'll tell you that. I want to move tomorrow now. Tell us about your relocation services business.
So basically, Settle Easy we've been around for a little over 5 years, and we help people with sort of full scale relocation. So when we started, it was the legal end. That's visas, residencies, just the general like legal bureaucracy of going from one place to another when you don't have a European passport. But from there, we've sort of grown into helping with general relocation things. So that might be finding an apartment, making sure that your pets can come with you. Oftentimes, that's helping people find English speaking doctors or pairing them with a medical interpreter to go with them to their non English speaking doctor. So we kind of do just a wide range of services to help people kind of settle, relocate, and make everything work as seamlessly as possible. The paperwork end does just get rigorous for people because they're doing things they've never done before. So I'll say to you, well, go to the state that you were married in and you have to get a certified marriage certificate, but it has to be less than 90 days old, so you have to do it now. But then you have to take it and get it apostilled by the Secretary of State, and then you have to get it certified translated. People's eyes glaze over, and that's for one single document. the process. And so we just try to take the guesswork out of that and send people links and say, step one, do this, step two, do this. And so there's a lot of just guidance that we really provide, because most of the things that we do, people can do on their own. So when people
Right.
ask, are we fast tracking things? Are we somehow tied into the government in some way where you can skip steps? No, there's no skipping steps. You've got to keep yourself legal. But what we do is basically say, we follow these steps and it works. If you don't follow these steps, it may not work. And if you work on your own, you may not know exactly what the steps are, because it is hazy at best, just
Yep.
figuring it all out. The consulates, for example, they have an English website and a Spanish website. You can click which language you want it in. And because I can speak both of those languages, I know how vastly different they are. Just the same exact web page if you click the little American flag versus clicking the little Spanish flag. And so we just try to help demystify those things. We use the Spanish version of everything because we assume that's what they're using. And we just help people keep on track for their move to make sure it all kind of works smoothly.
Perfect. How about, you mentioned pets, and that's one of our fears. So we have an 80-pound lab, and we have a 25-pound Sheltie. And my lab would be scared to death to go into the cargo. I would be scared to death for my lab to go into the cargo. Is there any other ways to transport animals?
I mean, there are pet relocation services who do things a little differently. The relocation services, though, tend to be so rather than you're above the plane and the animals in the cargo, those tend to just be cargo planes in
Right.
which every animal, horse, dog, cat, giant pallet of wine, whatever is being cargoed, is in this cargo plane, and there are persons to sort of be able to interface. If the dog is underneath the plane, they're underneath the plane.
Right.
But with the cargo planes and things, when they come cargo rather than commercial, there's people they can to look after them. But all in all, the getting your pet here process is pretty good. If you use one of the reputable companies, regardless of how they do it, like they do a really, really nice job. They'll take them out on the tarmac as soon as they can and like walk them around, make sure they can go potty. So if they have a layover, they get taken out and put back in. They don't just sit in a box for three and a
Good,
half
good.
hours on the tarmac in Paris. So the companies that we recommend, there are a few of them, and they just do a really, really, really nice job. And then there's a few airlines like Norwegian, for example, that does a great job with pets sort of on board compared to some of the
Okay.
others. And so, yeah, pets are part of the family. Spain has a law that says your pet is part of your legal family with all the rights and responsibilities of that. And your pet, when it comes here, will actually get an EU passport before you do. So as soon as they arrive, pets are eligible for EU passports so they can travel within the EU. For most people, they
That's
have
so
to
cool.
wait 10 years. So like my dog, yeah, so my dog is a EU citizen, and I still have to wait another year.
Oh
Go
my
figure.
gosh. I love it. I love that. What would you say living there for, what, you lived in Valencia for 8 years, eight and a
Yep.
half years?
hmm
What would you say are the cons, or something that you miss the most?
I mean, for me, the biggest con is probably less international food than I was used to. It's no different than like the small town in North Carolina that I'm from consisted mostly of fried chicken and barbecue. So if I would have come directly from there to Valencia, I would have thought, wow, like there's a lot of different international cuisines because like there's great Italian food here. Like I have a friend down the road, she's from Sicily, she owns a restaurant and it I've been to Sicily and the food's just as good down the street because she cooks the way she would have cooked there here. And so I think the European cuisine in Valencia is quite good. But for me, there are certain other things like we were talking about earlier, Mexican food, Thai food. I just wish there was a more robust food options for just everyday eating.
Gotcha.
Is probably that and hmm, I sometimes do wish that I did have more Valencian friends. I think that there are probably places where it's somehow easier to integrate into the community. Like Madrid, for example, is such an international city that people who are from Madrid have friends from all over the place. And even if they're not from Madrid, they might have moved. So maybe they moved from small town Spain to Madrid. Well, they're not from Madrid either. So yeah, they have friends from all over the place because they don't have their families either. So Madrid is a more international city. Whereas because of the stuff we talked about before, I kind of do wish that it was a little easier to make local friends and to eat Mexican food with them. So I guess that.
That sounds great.
So basically, eat your tacos. The take home from this whole podcast is eat your tacos, burritos, and chimichangas, and have all the chips and salsa and queso dip you can before you come.
There you go.
Just get it in, have your fill, and then you'll have a reason to go back and visit.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, we have a good Mexican presence here in Phoenix. Good Mexican food. In wrapping up, what would you say to the audience if they're thinking about relocating to Valencia?
You know, I think Valencia is a beautiful, vibrant place. And because I picked Valencia sort of in an arbitrary manner, I had the option of from here, once I had traveled to various other places, for jumping off to somewhere else. And even when I looked into those other places sort of seriously, I always came back to saying, am I giving up more good than I'm going to get from this move? And the answer every time has been yes. So Valencia is a great jumping off point. So even if you do speak French and you're considering moving to France, but you can't get Valencia out of your mind or Spain out of your mind, you can just go visit France. It's right across the border. Or
Right.
if your historical roots, say you're Italian and you keep thinking, well, my great-grandpa was Italian, I want to move to Italy. That too is a 90-minute flight and would cost you, generally, you can fly for less than €30. And so I always say that Valencia is a great home base. And then once you're in Europe, your ability to travel, see, explore, and maybe even think of a new place to live. Say you find somewhere and you really do love it. Valencia is a great place for jumping off because it's affordable while you're doing all that traveling.
Right.
So, I mean, I can't say enough about it. I really love the place. I've thought about moving other places, and I always tell myself no, just because Valencia is really, really wonderful place to be.
That's great. And I always think to myself, it's like, where could I move that I won't be bored? So I think about Valencia as opposed to Barcelona, as opposed to Alicante and Malaga. Those are kind of like the places I've looked at. Barcelona, for me personally, even though I haven't been there yet and I want to go, I want to experience it, might be just a little bit pricey for me. But
Yeah. I mean, I always say, like, I would never be bored in Paris, but I also wouldn't be able to go out because I wouldn't be able to afford to go out. So that's why I love visiting Paris, because I will spend in a week in Paris what I would spend in a month or two in Valencia. And so it's one of those things where I can do that because it's affordable here. But yeah, there's plenty of places in the world I'd never be bored. You'd never be bored in New York City, but you'd also be living
right,
in a basement with no windows. So
exactly. It's a balance.
you've got to weigh that quality of life, and the quality of life that Valencia offers really can't be beat.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I appreciate the time you've taken to speak to us. I really appreciate that. And we'll speak again, and we'll send all of our people in our groups over to you and to talk to you if they're
Sure.
thinking about relocating in Valencia as well. Do you have anything else to add before we go?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you again. Appreciate everything that you've done, and we will talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Where Do Gays Retire podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our podcast and consider making a donation by clicking the coffee cup on any page at www.wheredogaysretire.com. Each cup of coffee that you buy costs $5 and goes towards helping us continue the podcast. Thank you for your continued support.